Hello there! In this video, I'm going to transform this messy model shop into a functional, clean workspace. So, a little backstory. In June of 2021, ZGF Architects contracted me to clean up and organize their new model shop after a big move. And here you can see some before shots of what we're working with in this new space. Unfortunately, they had to pack up and move just as the pandemic was starting in April of 2020, so things were a little chaotic in this starting state, but the bones of the shop were great. So in this video, I'll show you how I cleaned up and organized these tools and materials they had on hand. You'll also see how I calibrated and refurbished some of the equipment that needed a little love, and we'll also cover some custom-built projects for organization. This is a lot to cover, so let's get started. First, I needed to start with an initial cleanup of everything. This basically included unboxing everything, taking stock of what we had, and then putting it in its general end location. And while doing this, I found a few treasures, including these cute little model trees. Here, I'm at the main work desk, off to the side of the clean shop. This was probably the easiest and most straightforward part of this whole experience. I just had to dust off what needed to be cleaned. And these are some sharps that I'm organizing. And behold, the cleanest part of the shop, at least for now. Next, I had to do some cord organization. Here, I'm taking out all of the wood we had packed away just so I could have an idea of different species we had on hand. Once all that was done in the wood shop, I gave everything a nice vacuum. Here I am in the spray booth, and I didn't do much here. I just took all the paint out and organized it by color. And here's what it's looking like at this stage. Not bad, but it wasn't fully functional. At this point, I had a good idea, though, of materials and tools I needed to buy. I also had a game plan for what needed to get done before the shop was usable. I decided to get going with a simple project, just organizing all of these electronics. Most of the stuff is used to make models light up, so it's nothing that fancy. And I'll put all that stuff away in this organizer. And you can see off to the side our 3D printer next to all of this. Next, I started working on the 3D printers, and these guys needed a lot of help. So to start, I took the build plate off to clean off any glue residue. I then moved the build plate up and down so I could wipe down or vacuum any leftover dust or 3D printed plastic. At this point, I tried to load in some material, and I noticed that nothing was pushing through the nozzle. And I already knew it was wrong. The gear pushing the filament in the back of the machine was digging into the plastic and couldn't get any traction. This is a really common issue with Altimakers, and the solution is to take apart the stepper motor casing and gears and just clean them out with some compressed air and a brush. And after all that, I leveled the beds and everything was working great. My next priority was cleaning the table saw. I needed this in working condition so I could use it for some custom projects, and the top of it was just so rusty and unusable. I've never seen a table saw in such bad condition before. So to complete this project, I used naphtha and a circular saw to work off the rusty top coat. And here you can see a side-by-side of what the table saw should look like on the left and the rusty state that it was in on the right. This was probably one of the more satisfying projects to work on just because it was so easy and it made such a visual difference. And to protect this top, I'm going to rub on some finishing wax. And here's the final product. With my newly functional table saw, my first custom project for this contract was building a shelf for clamp storage. This shelf will kind of look like a mounted bookcase with notches in the shelves to hold the individual clamps. I started by first cutting down the strips of plywood that will make up the sides and shelves. I then cut in notches that will fit the clamps. Unfortunately, I didn't have a dado blade, which probably would have made this move a lot more quickly. The single thin blade though still works, it just took a little bit extra time. I then drilled in some pocket holes to both the back of the case to mount it to the wall and also to the corners where I was going to be assembling everything. And here I am screwing everything together. And once everything was assembled, I drilled straight into those pocket holes into the wall studs, so everything was nice and secure. So now we can store all of those clamps. And what's nice about this build is that you can also just store boxy tools on those open shelves. Next on my organization to-do list was to sort out and display all of our fine hardwoods. We had a lot of different species, and I decided the best way to display them was on a wall-mounted shelf system in clear bins. I started out by marking out where my studs were and drawing some level lines for the bracket system. These shelves were going to support a lot of weight, so I really had to secure the system. I did this by both directly screwing the wall bracket into studs and supplementing the other screws with heavy-duty drywall anchors. Once everything was secure, I could start placing my shelves. Then I placed my bins on the bottom for smaller block storage, and on the top shelves I'll put my larger pieces of wood, and everything's going to be organized by species type. And just to complete this corner, I hung up a bracket to hold some brooms and other cleaning materials. My biggest build was making some rolling wood storage for large sheet goods and long construction wood. Here you can see a front profile of what I built. The sides were for leaning sheet goods along, and the center shelves were for long, thin pieces of wood. And if that doesn't make sense, don't worry, it'll become clear once it's all assembled. I started by cutting out all of my pieces from large 4x8 sheets of plywood, and man, this is hard if you don't have a vertical table saw. You can see me struggling here with these very stressed expressions. The center and sides of these units were slightly leaning, so I had to cut in about 10-degree angles on most of the piece's edges so they'd screw together flat. And here are all those center shelves stacked up in order. Next, I drilled in pocket holes to those center shelves to assemble them seamlessly, and then I could screw those pieces into the side walls of the build. With one side assembled, I can now screw together the second side. And you can kind of see here why I had to cut in those 10-degree angles to the center shelves. It gives a slant to the whole frame. Next, I had to assemble the base for the slanted frame to fit on. I started by screwing together some 2x4s in the base outline. Then I screwed that frame into the plywood base. With the base assembled, I can line up the slanted frame and screw it into the bottom. I attached this lift to both edges so anything I lean up against the walls won't slide out. And at this point, a majority of the build was done. All I had left to do was attach the casters to the base so the interior storage system could roll around. Once all that was done, I turned it right side up. This is a really practical build that I'm sure will be used a whole lot. And finally, I can start stacking on all of my materials. Next, I want to show you how I use the pegboard system to organize all of those hand tools. Now, this project actually went on throughout the whole contract. I cleaned up a little bit here, a little bit there, until I was happy with everything. I cut all of it together, though, as if it was done in one go. To get started, I organized all of the pegboard hooks into their different types. Next, I just took inventory of all the tools we had, and there were a lot. I then organized everything into bins based on how I generally wanted to group them on the wall. Once I got some general organization, I started hanging stuff. I put mostly hand tools on the right and power tools on the left. I hung these table saw blades along the top because we don't change them out that often, and I just thought it looked cool. And this is what it's looking like midway through. After I got some general wall organization, I decided to clean up the combination sander and drum sander. In the center of the table, I put our miter saw. This caused me to do a little rearranging of the tools so that they were still accessible. And I'm hanging up one of those file folder organizers that you'd normally mount to your wall, and I'm organizing the sheet sandpaper by grit. And here I'm organizing the palm sander pad replacements. Here I'm trimming up this pegboard mountable shelf to give it a slimmer profile to hold our battery packs for our power tools. It's nice to get those battery packs off the table so we can maximize our work surface. And finally, in the far right corner, I'm hanging up some shelves to hold our solvents and other cleaning materials. And here's a final look at everything. Next, let's move to the spray booth, which is a small room just off to the side of the woodshop. The only project I completed here was making some custom shelves to display and organize the paints we had on hand. The design here is pretty simple. I just used some standard plywood to cut out strips that would be our shelves. And I screwed in some pocket holes spaced out to line up with the studs in the wall. And as an extra detail, I cut out these strips of plywood that will create a lip on the edge of the shelf. I glued that down along the edge so the plywood layers from the front would look as though they wrap around to the top of the shelf. For one set of shelves, I rounded out the edges just as a little extra design detail. Now I can install those first set of shelves. Now, if these shelves were wider or I had to hold something heavier on them, I probably wouldn't use this attachment method. The pocket holes and screws just wouldn't be strong enough to hold something else. I can get away with this attachment method though because the load requirements are so light. Once that's installed, I can organize the paints by color. Off in the corner, there's this weird pocket with exposed concrete brick that I think used to be a window. To make the most of this space, I installed some more shelves. I couldn't just drill into the brick though. I didn't have the right equipment for that. What I did instead was glue on these spacers using industrial concrete adhesive. Once the adhesive fully cured, I then glued on my custom cut shelves both to the spacers and the concrete block. And once again, with all that installed, I could organize my sprays. I am really pleased with this final product. It looks really clean and stylish while still being functional. Just next to the spray booth is an almost identical room where we kept the laser cutter, and I had a handful of projects to do here to make it usable. I first hung some shelving over the work desk next to that laser cutter. This would hold things like MDF sheets for cutting. Just as you enter the laser shop, you see this exposed concrete brick depression, similar to that one that we saw in our spray booth. Instead of turning it into shelving though, I decided to make this a standing desk with some storage underneath. I am using that same construction adhesive to glue down the first bottom shelf to my desk. And to make that level and secure, I'm using a few shims. Once that shelf cured, I glued on a thicker spacer just above it, and this will act as a finishing material and a surface to drill into to attach that main desk above. And I waited for that spacer to cure and then applied my custom cut desk. I glued it to the concrete bricks and screwed it into my spacer below to make it really secure. To finish off that top portion of this former window, I decided to add some corkboard. I couldn't just directly glue that corkboard to this uneven opening though. You can see here I first applied a frame. After that, I applied a subsurface of more plywood, which once again took a lot of effort to get up there. To apply my corkboard to this surface, I used contact cement. With this product, you cover both surfaces with the cement and then let it dry for a few minutes. After that, I pressed it against my subsurface and used a flat joint compound knife to smooth it out. With all that done, I could attach my computer monitor and set up my desk. The final project I completed in this space was hanging up these file organizers onto the wall to hold things like small pieces of laser cuttable wood. These folder dividers should look familiar. They're the same ones that we used in the woodshop to organize our sandpaper. Once those were hung, I organized our wood by species and thickness. And here's a final look at that corner. Much like the wood shop, our clean shop also had a large pegboard system. Here, I decided to use a combination of different storage solutions to organize all of our equipment. To get started, I'm doing some rough placements of tools and materials starting with our tapes, which is something that we need to have very accessible. I then installed this long span of shelves. This will hold things that we don't need that often, like our extensive tree collection, which you can see me organizing here. And on the lower shelves, I'll place our silicone casting materials. Off to the right side of the pegboard, I organized the cutting tools and glues in baskets and hanging clips. Up against this wall will be some rolling tables. My final big project for this wall was organizing and hanging all of our hardware. You can see me organizing all of our different screws here. These little containers are great because they have a hook on the back that allows them to slide on and off and metal bars, so you could take all of your hardware to your workbench to use, then easily put it back. I cut these custom bars to bolt into the shelving system here to make those containers compatible. Once those were attached, I could start putting on my containers. And that does it for this pegboard wall. And my final big project was assembling these butcher block tables. This was one of the last projects that I had to do because these tables came in so late due to supply chain issues. It took almost 4 months from the point of purchasing these tables for them to be delivered. This is one of the few times that I didn't need to do a custom build, so we saved some money in my labor costs. And here I am turning over those tables after assembly. I know I make it look easy, but it did take a lot of effort to get these right side up. And here is the final shot of those tables. And with that, I completed this major shop cleanup. Let's take a look at some final shots. This was a long journey over several months, and I only showed you a small sample of everything I did for this space. So, if you have any questions, please ask them in the comments below. I'll be sure to answer everything. I want to thank ZGF for contracting me on this project, and another big thanks to you for watching. Have a good one.